Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Literature Channel. I'm Tim Wilson, and this is the last of a series of lectures on Homer's epic, the Odyssey. So today we will cover the last six books of the epic, books 18 to 24, beginning with the events in books 18 and 19. Book 19 opens with the encounter of Odysseus and Penelope. Um, Penelope, first, of course, Telemachus and Odysseus are storing away the weapons from the Great Hall. This is a wise move. They're taking away any weapons that might be in the room as they prepare for the eventual slaughter of the suitors. They don't want the suitors to be able to get their hands on any weapons. After this, the Penelope comes downstairs and speaks to Odysseus. This is their first encounter. They're sitting on either side of the hearth, and this is a symbolic center of the household. If you think about, especially in pre-industrial societies, the nature of the hearth is so important for a home, the source of light, source of heat, source of where food would be prepared, that type of thing. So is the center of the household, and thus provides a symbolic uh, has a symbolic significance in terms of where they do encounter one another for the first time. Now, Penelope doesn't know it's Odysseus. Odysseus is in disguise. And they're not alone in the room. Eurycleia, Eurynomi, Melantho, sister of the the devious goatherd Melanthius, they're all in the room, maybe other female servants, so they can't be open with one another. Odysseus can't say, "Hey, it's me, I'm going to kill the suitors." Um, Penelope begins by asking who she thinks is a beggar, who he is. He tells her that she can ask anything else, but not his identity. So at first it seems like he's been lying quite a bit so far, but uh, but maybe he can't bring himself to lie to his wife. Um, she she responds with a description of her own troubles, including the famous weaving trick that we mentioned before, which allowed her to keep the suitors at bay for over 3 years. And then she again asks about his background, and he responds with a fabricated story saying that he came from Crete and that he met Odysseus before the Trojan War. This doesn't help Penelope much because it doesn't help her at all. She doesn't know he's been gone for 20 years, and this beggar only saw Odysseus just before the Trojan War, not very recently. So she begins weeping. And this conversation is the most intense emotional trial that Odysseus has yet encountered. So his wife is weeping there because she has no word of whether her husband is alive or dead. And the fact that this is such an intense emotional trial is stressed in a simile describing Penelope's weeping and his reaction. So here's that simile. This is book 19, lines 236 to 45 in the Fagles translation. As she listened on, her tears flowed and soaked her cheeks. As the heavy snow melts down from the high mountain ridges, snow the west wind piles there, and the warm east wind thaws, and the snow, melting, swells the rivers to overflow their banks. So she dissolved in tears, streaming down her lovely cheeks, weeping for him, her husband, sitting there right beside her. Odysseus' heart went out to his grief-stricken wife, but under his lids, his eyes remained stock still. They might have been horn or iron. His guile fought back his tears. So we see that epic simile structure. Just as the heavy snow melts, so too she dissolved in tears. And we see his response is one of having, say, inwardly having the same type of response, but outwardly he has to remain like horn or iron, solid, as opposed to the melting snow. Penelope then offers Odysseus a bath, and he, instead of asking for a younger female servant, asks for an aged woman to wash his feet, and only his feet. Uh, Penelope summons Eurycleia to wash the guest's feet. Again, notice the kind of irony here that this is his home, but he's being treated as a guest, and that theme of xenia. Eurycleia had known Odysseus since he was a child and recognizes, as she's washing his feet, a scar on his thigh. So Eurycleia's sight of the scar leads to a long description of how and when Odysseus got the scar and his name. So the two, let's say, markers of his identity. So the scar occurred when visiting his grandfather. So the young Odysseus took part in a boar hunt, and he was wounded by the boar's tusk in the thigh just as he was delivering a death blow to the Thor with a spear to the Thor's skull. So the grandfather had also earlier, when Odysseus was a baby, had also given the name to Odysseus, and the name seems to mean something like giver and receiver of pain, and the physical sign of the scar, the fact that he got it from a boar, he receiving pain from a boar while giving pain to that boar, seems to be linked intimately with his name and with his essential identity. So his name and this identity as giver and receiver of pain is enacted throughout the Odyssey. In all of his adventures, he both suffers and causes physical or emotional pain. We see this with the Cyclops. We see this even with characters such as the Phaeacians, whom we didn't mention this when we talked about Book 13, but after having delivered Odysseus safely to Ithaca, Poseidon asks Zeus if he may turn the ship that out of revenge. He's dead set against Odysseus's return, and thus dead set against anyone who aided in this return. So Poseidon requests that he be able to turn the ship to stone in the harbor of the Phaeacians, the ship that had returned Odysseus. So that is granted. So the ship that returned Odysseus and that crew, they all died. They're turned to stone in the harbor. And Poseidon also requested that a mountain be placed on the island to hide the island. I destroy the Phaeacians as a whole. It's unclear. We have different manuscripts. It's unclear from the evidence whether Zeus's reply to that is, yeah, go ahead, or just turn the ship to stone. So depending on your interpretation of the Odyssey, that can be quite a dark ending for the Phaeacians, let us say. At the very least, we know that the Phaeacians won't be sending home wayward travelers with the type of xenia that Odysseus received anymore. They are closing off that harbor and will not be dealing with strangers in the same way. Their way of life has been changed at the very least. And this kind of, again, causing physical, emotional pain while receiving it is at play even in his dealings with the Phaeacians. So starting in book 2021, the action gets started in relation to Odysseus enacting his revenge on the suitors. So Penelope had mentioned the contest of the bow that she would propose in book 19, but it actually takes place in book 21. She brings down Odysseus's bow from the storeroom. She weeps as she holds it, and she tells the suitors that she will marry whichever one of them can string the bow most easily and shoot an arrow through 12 axes. So whether it's a hole in the axe head or a hole in the handle for hanging it. It's not quite clear what these holes in the axe would be, but needless to say, it's a it's a very difficult feat to perform. The suitors fail to string the bow. This bow is much too rigid for them to be able to bend it. They're tearing their hands up as they try. Eumaeus brings the bow to Odysseus, who strings it easily, and the poet compares Odysseus' stringing of the bow to a bard's stringing of a lyre. So there's actually the name of a book by Seth Bernardetti called "The Bow and the Lyre," and this, let's say, this the parallel between the heroism of Odysseus as portrayed by Homer and the way in which uh, poetry, uh, the represented by the lyre, can, let's say, deceive, just like Odysseus does deceive, um, can bring us to our rightful home, can suit speeches to the audience. There's a lot of parallels between Odysseus and the poet as represented in the Odyssey. So Odysseus shoots through the axes and nods to Telemachus, who comes to stand close beside him. He then shoots the leader of the suitors, Antinous, and with Athena's help, Odysseus and Telemachus kill all the suitors. First, Odysseus holds the suitors at bay with arrows, and Telemachus runs to get armor for himself, Odysseus, Eumaeus, and Loidios. So a couple of loyal servants, and by mistake he leaves the door to the storeroom open. So during this kind of battle, Melanthios, the unfaithful goatherd who's sided with the suitors, is able to climb through a vent in the wall, get some armor for the suitors. They discover this, and Telemachus admits, he stands up, says, Odysseus, it was me that mistakenly left the door open, completely my fault. And we can see in this kind of Telemachus's final maturation, owning up and taking accountability for that fault. So, as I said, with Athena's help, he's able to slay all of the suitors, and they have to clean up the hall. Eurycleia goes to tell Penelope that Odysseus has returned and killed the suitors. She refuses to believe Eurycleia. She's cautious and prudent, as is Odysseus when he reaches a new land and he doesn't know what's going on. Is this really a friendly people? Are they murderous, treacherous? Is this someone trying to deceive me? She is equally cautious, prudent, and equally the thoughtful hero that Odysseus is. Like, in some ways, the Odyssey is about the heroism of both Odysseus and Penelope. So she'll go downstairs to see the dead suitors and the man who killed them. Odysseus is bathed, and Athena makes him look younger and more beautiful. They sit down, and Penelope kind of tests him to make sure, is this really Odysseus, or is this someone trying to deceive her? She says, okay, you need a bed. You can have your own bed, which you built. We'll have them take it out of the bedroom, put it outside, and you can use that. Odysseus' reaction, he gets angry because he knows that he built this bed with using as one of its posts an olive tree, a living tree, that is in the middle of the house, and so he built the bed as part of that tree, and he built the bedroom around that tree, and then built the house around the bedroom. So he knows it's immovable. So he thinks, have you destroyed that bed? You've got some other crappy bed there replacing it, and who's been sleeping in that bed while I've been gone? So the bed serves as a symbol of Odysseus's and Penelope's marriage, as well as Penelope's fidelity, and it's also her her ruse to kind of test Odysseus's identity. So she recognizes that this is Odysseus, and she rushes to kiss him and embrace him, and asks him not to be angry at her caution. And again, I'll just stress this point that in her guile and caution, she's a fitting pair for Odysseus, and is shows the same type of heroism that Odysseus does. And in one of the most famous epic similes in the Odyssey, he describes their reunion here. Book 23 goes as follows. Joy, warm as the joy that shipwrecked sailors feel when they catch sight of land. Poseidon has struck their well-rigged ship on the open sea with gale winds and crushing walls of waves, and only a few escape, swimming, struggling out of the frothing surf to reach the shore, their bodies crusted with salt, but buoyed up with joy as they plant their feet on solid ground again, spared a deadly fate. So joyous now to her the sight of her husband, vivid in her gaze, that her white arms embracing his neck would never for a moment let him go. So the joy here of a shipwrecked sailor upon seeing land is compared to the joy not of Odysseus upon seeing his wife and embracing her, or embracing his home, after he's been shipwrecked countless times, but to the joy of Penelope upon seeing Odysseus, and realizing and confirming that it is indeed him. So how many times earlier in the Odyssey did we see, let's say, literal shipwrecks, actual shipwrecks where the other sailors are drowned and it's Odysseus alone, salt encrusted as he got to the Isle of the Phaeacians, for instance? That was let's say, a literal voyage, a literal shipwreck. Penelope has, in the epic Simile, a metaphoric, has been experiencing metaphorically, or by analogy, the same type of harrowing, um, uh, death-defying scrapes, and is equally heroically happy at the end to see solid ground, so to speak. So book 24 opens with a second Nekuia, which begins with a conversation between Achilles and Agamemnon, and then shows the souls of the suitors arriving in Hades. So as I say here in the slide, some critics think this is spurious, like not actually written by Homer, that was added later, but there is a certain, let's say, integrity with the structure of the whole. It seems to make sense in terms of the structure of the whole, as it confirms once again this parallel between Agamemnon and Odysseus, and puts it to rest, and it shows that comparison and says, no, actually Odysseus is not like Agamemnon, because Penelope is not like Clytemnestra. Penelope did not kill Odysseus, quite the opposite. Penelope was faithful. Penelope warmly embraced him on his return, and Agamemnon himself praises Penelope. So next, in the kind of the final stages, Odysseus needs to find his father, and in a sense bring him back to his rightful identity. So after this scene in the underworld, the poem turns back to the world of the living, and to Ithaca, where Odysseus goes to visit his father Laertes. And when he sees his father, he's distressed at how unkempt he looks, because he's out in the countryside and he's out of despair. He's kind of let himself go. And Laertes refuses to believe it's his son without proof. So Odysseus shows him his scar and describes the trees they planted together when Odysseus was small. So we've had a number of recognition scenes in the Odyssey, and there's basically two available strategies. There's a scar of physical identification. There's a shared emotional memory. So Eurycleia, Eumaeus, and Phaeacians recognize him through the scar, so through a physical sign. Penelope recognizes him through the shared memory of the bed that they've made as the center of their home. Laertes is offered both types of proof, the scar and a shared memory, whereas Telemachus doesn't have either. He's offered no proof, but has to accept his father on trust. After the reunion, Laertes and Odysseus return to town where with Telemachus, they must battle the relatives of the suitors. So they've killed 108 suitors, young men who have families, who want revenge. And so we're about to have a battle, kind of a civil war within Ithaca. Athena allows Laertes to kill one person, but then brings the battle to a halt and requires both sides to pledge peace. And Athena is this figure of bringing domestic and civil order to a community. We see this again in Aeschylus's Oresteia at the end of that trilogy of plays. Again, she is the one who brings order to Athens by instituting a court institution that will settle disputes rather than blood vengeance being an ongoing circle of killing someone who killed a relative, and then they kill someone because of they need to get their vengeance. So justice and society rest on these institutions that do away with endless blood violence, and so too here we have early signs of that say figure for Athena. So in summary, just to remind us of some of the themes, and especially as it's connected to this theme of time and temporality and how it's such an important part of the human experience. So we talked about homecoming as an important theme, nostos, and so this is an epic about trying to get home, trying to find one's home, and how that's related to time in relationship to anticipation, looking forward to that return, but also memory of times when it's had. Xenia, the guest host relationship, how that ensures continuity and predictability of human behavior over time. The importance of the family as ensuring continuity. So we have Laertes and Odysseus, Penelope, and then to Telemachus, this kind of continuity through time of the generations. Narrative time and story time we talked about. So the narrative ordering of our events and how we bring them together into a narrative flow that is temporal and gives a certain meaning to our lives through how we tell a story about our lives. And we see that kind of storytelling in the Odyssey itself. And the distinction between gods and mortals, probably in Homer, the most, I would say, important takeaway from both the Iliad and the Odyssey is this constant underlining of the human condition as temporal and mortal in its contrast and the repeated contrast with that of the gods, the existence of the gods being immortal, deathless, and not bound by time. This essential difference highlights the human condition. It brings meaning and value to the human condition. So I hope you enjoyed these lectures. I hope you read the Homer, the Odyssey, and go and read the Iliad as well. I invite you to check out my lectures on the Iliad as well. And all the best. Thank you very much.